Recording started.
Recording started. Welcome. My name is Kathy House, and this is Judy Fredrickson. We teach at Truckee Meadows Community College in Reno. We were here about a year ago presenting on scenario-based learning, and when we talked about coming this year, we thought we're going to talk about what we've learned in our adventure in teaching in scenario-based learning, because we're big advocates for it, but there are definitely some things we want to share with you, what we've learned, so that if you decide to use that, then you can learn from our experiences. So we thought we'd start with what is scenario-based learning. And if you saw us last year, is anybody familiar with it? Scenario-based learning? Well, you are. Okay. So it's problem-based learning, but you're using a real-life scenario. And the students work in teams. You have community involvement and things like that. So it falls under the umbrella of problem-based learning, but with scenarios. So I'm going to let Judy go through with what is scenario-based learning, and then we're going to talk about some of our tales from the trenches, is what we called it, and some pros and cons and things that we've learned along the way. So go ahead.
Okay, so if you want to do our little slide.
Oh, we're using Prezi, and we're kind of new to this. So if I goof it up, then. And I've already done that. Yeah, then it's his fault.
Kathy said the two of us took a couple of our classes. We got involved with scenario-based learning about 3 years ago now, 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago. And I teach computer science. Kat teaches Linux courses, Linux and Unix courses. And I've always done traditional lecture lab courses for decades. And Kat has done similarly. And we got involved with Destination PBL a few years back on a previous grant, it's now called Destination PBL, and got involved with scenario-based learning and have turned our teaching on its head. And so what we've actually done is we've shifted from teacher lecture courses to facilitation. I teach my CS1 class now with no lecturing, and it's been a fascinating experience. What I do is I give my students resources, and I give them problems to solve. And from the first day they walk in, where they don't even know how to use a compiler, most of them they haven't had a prerequisite course to that class at our school. And so they have to learn how to compile and run a couple programs on their own with the resources that I give them. So they have to become self-sufficient. They have to go in and read the resources that I've given them, which is the information for how to compile and run, what IDE does for them. And then they also use me as a resource. So I don't give them information until they ask a question. And then when they ask me a question, then of course I'll give them information. And it takes them a couple days usually to actually come ahead.
You need to be closer to the mic.
Oh, do I? I'm sorry.
You're good.
But it's a fascinating experience. It was for me and Kat to go through and make this transition, because it's a huge transition from our traditional way of teaching. But the students have to engage. Without active engagement on the students' part, they aren't going to go anywhere. And so if they don't engage, they're not going to survive. And they learn that relatively quickly, that, hey, I can't ride on the coattails of somebody else in the classroom. I can't sit here and pretend that I know what's going on. I have to engage if I'm going to be successful in this class. And so, again, like this says, active learning, the students have to do this. And we also, one part of SBL as we use it is industry input. So what we try to do in all of our classes is we try to partner with at least one individual in industry that is, in my case, a software developer, in Kat's case, somebody who's in the Linux users group in the community. And you can get them as involved in your classes as you want to.
We started with them helping us develop a scenario. So you can even start just there and say, okay, what's typical problems that happen day to day in your world?
Yeah, what's something that you do in business every day? And so I worked with one of our local gaming companies, and they helped me develop all of my deliverable materials that my students turn in. So not only do they start programming, but they also, I have them use development headers like they're used in industry, which I had used years previously and didn't know if they had been updated, because I haven't been in industry for a few years. And so they have coding standards that they have to follow. They have comment headers that they have to produce on their documentation. They have to debug code and learn how to create test cases, and they use bug reports based on industry, based on the corporation that I work with. And so they get this hands-on feel for actually working in the software group that they would normally get.
And your industry input can also be reviewing their work once they've done it. They can come into class and interview and ask questions why they chose to do that. So there's lots of different levels of industry input you can have.
Yeah, Elaine does a lot with SBL, and she has people come into her classroom and actually evaluate presentations, don't you, on a regular basis?
They're not for grades. They critique it. They get feedback.
They critique the work throughout the semester and give feedback on it. And that's great. It gives the students more buy-in because they're actually hearing it from, I feel like I'm mom. You know, even when I was teaching when I was 20 years old, you know, it's like, there's mom up there. We're sort of like teachers like parents, you know. Like my teacher tells me not a big deal, you know. But when somebody from industry walks in and says, hey, I'm a software developer out in the field, let me talk to you about this and look at your code and give you some ideas, they take that so much more seriously. And so it's really a great thing to do. And so we try to involve a lot of industry in our classroom in that. So what we do is we don't have typical assignments anymore. We have challenges. We give the students work that is based on something that they might see in the real world. Now, in my CS class, it's hard. People have never programmed before, so I can't say, okay, you're a programmer. So what I do is we start out sending a memo that says, hey, you have just been hired as a programmer trainee at this company. Sierra, what's the name of our company?
Advanced Energy
Systems.
My students are actually consultants in this, so yeah, they can't really run a network, so I've hired them as consultants.
And in my class, they're programmer trainees, and they're in a 15-week training course. And if they are successful at the end of the training course, then they'll be advanced to being a programmer, which would be the DSQ course. And so but I give them projects that they have to do during the course of the semester. They have, it's all group work. They work in teams of 2 to 4 people. And they help each other. And as we heard this morning on the keynote, what industry is looking for us to do is to do more employability skills and introduce soft skills into the classroom. Well, as a computer science instructor, I thought, for years, I said, I don't have time for that. We teach technical stuff. We don't have time to do that stuff.
They don't need those skills.
Yeah. It's like, I just need to teach them how to do so much stuff. How do I have time to fit this into a semester? Well, when you take the lecturing away, all you're doing is taking away what you thought was so valuable because you were spending your time filling your time and feeling good about what you were doing outside the classroom, I think. And so you take that away, and then you have time for them to do more hands-on work, to be constantly working while they're in the classroom, interacting with their fellow teammates. And then when they get stuck, like somebody said, you guys said in your previous talk, the one I just came from, was that the students asked each other questions, or somebody said in there that the students asked each other questions before they asked you. So the first line of defense for somebody who doesn't know something are their teammates. And they say, hey, I don't know what I'm doing, because they're sitting and they're interacting and working constantly while they're in the classroom. And then when they don't understand, they can either hit the people on the other side of them in the next team, or they'll eventually come to me and say, hey, I don't understand this. Can you explain this to us, or can you give us a little update on that? And so I'm there, and there's also a lot of resources that we have online that are available for the students. Lots of code examples, lots of materials to read and that sort of stuff. So it's really great for them. They complain a lot, but that's just because they're saying, you're not teaching me, because I'm not standing up there lecturing. They can't surf the web. well, I'm lecturing, because I'm no longer lecturing, and I'm saying, okay, you guys work, you guys have a project, and then I can walk through the room and I can help people if they need it. But they can't sit there and do whatever they would normally do while I was up there doing myself.
One of the interesting things that Judy did that I incorporated this year was she told them the first day is, I don't know what the answers are unless you ask me the right questions. And so what I saw this semester with my students is they developed those skills that I thought were really important in how to ask the right question. I mean, I am a resource, but I don't know what to tell you unless you tell me what you need to know. And my evaluations showed me that they liked that, developing this skill.
And that's a critical skill for someone to learn. Is to say, I've got a problem, particularly in the work environment. When they go out to work, they're given a problem to solve, and they aren't given a textbook that leads them through the chapter that's going to help them solve it. And so they're given a problem, and they have to figure out, what are the questions I have to ask so that I can move forward in solving this problem? Or they at least have to take the initiative to go and ask somebody for help. And so what we're hoping to do through SBL is to teach them that you've got a problem that's totally alien to you. Like especially probably 60% of my students walk into the classroom without having ever worked with a compiler. They say they're CS students, but what have they done? I don't know what they've done. They certainly don't know the compiler we use in that class is Microsoft Visual Studio. Unfortunately, not a trivial IDE to get into anymore. And so they walk in there and they say, what do you mean I have to compile and run a program and know where to put it into the file? Okay. Well, they figure it out and they all get it done within a couple of days. But they have to get over that, I don't know how to do it and you aren't showing me how to do it. And they do that pretty simply. So you had a question?
I did. I was wondering if they ever had the opportunity to work with a problem client.
Pardon?
Do the students have the opportunity to work with a problem client? I know that in some of my experiences, the technical part is the easy part. Dealing with the client and the people skills is actually the harder part. Yeah. Do they get that opportunity sometimes?
I incorporate that. I'll walk in and say, oh my God, your machines all got hacked into, and all night long I say, and they have to explain to the client that they spooked up, and they have to constantly justify what they're doing. And it's really nice when I do have an industry person there. I don't always. Sometimes I'm the client. I'm the project manager, but they still have to, when these things happen, tell me, how does this happen? And they get pretty nervous about it. I'd like to incorporate, I wish I had more time to incorporate things like just more interview skills and things like that too, but I do throw some problems in there.
And I think
but I'm not cranky.
I think that's something that'll come. I'm doing this right now in my beginnings programming class. And so they're learning, they're just learning the basic control structures and whatnot. When we need a capstone class, I'm trying to morph this. I'm working this into my second semester programming class and then into a capstone class. Since we're only at the community college level, we just have 2 years that we have this, but maybe a third semester class where they actually interface with another class possibly, and then also being able to do some interfacing with the client. Once they have more solid programming skills, then they can do that, because I think that's really valuable. And there's so much. I do give them one assignment where they're given specs for a design for a program, and they develop and unit test all the individual functions for that. And then when they go to do the integration, they do get another memo from the user, who they never met, that says, oh, I changed my design. So yeah, you need to go do your integration, but some of these specs have changed. And so they see a little of that, but they don't have the one-on-one communication, or with somebody who's indecisive or argumentative, or those sorts of problems that we all run into.
The problem that you haven't solved, is this something that in other words, there is a way that you want the final thing to look, or are they coming up with whatever their own solutions to the problem?
They're coming up with their own solution to the problem. Now, like for example, the problem I just gave, where I gave them, oh sorry, I like to stand over here. Where the problem that I gave, where I gave them specs, they have specific specs. For I've got some functions here, so they have to follow, I want these function names, these parameters, so that the functions can interface with each other, because they've broken it up and everybody's taking portions of this code, and then they have to integrate it together later.
Now, is that the rubric that you used to grade this? How do you actually grade that final?
There are rubrics. So that's one thing with SDL is you have to, with working on these projects, having a rubric and a well-defined way to assess their work is really important.
That was a good question, because that kind of leads up to this. My contact with my students and your contact with your students is your course objectives or something like that. And that was always my big problem, is I do have a finished thing. I need to see something finished. I don't care how they get there, but they have to follow. They have to come up with a solution in these objectives. So in my memo to the students every week, this is just one task that I have them do. I gently guide them, because these are the things, and when they present to the client what they're going to do, I need them to hit every bulleted item there, because that's my course objective. So that's the way I get around it. And then when I grade them or look at their projects, I do have a well-defined rubric, and all these things must have been hit upon. So.
When they received that memo, did they know all the details on those bullet points, or did they have to learn what those things mean?
No, they have to learn what those mean.
Yeah, so the projects, when we give them projects, they haven't learned, we haven't taught them, because we don't lecture, we haven't given them the material that they need. So I give my students a programming problem where they have to work with if-else's and repetition. And I've never talked about it in class. And so they're like, well, what the heck is this? I don't know what's going on. So they're very confused. They're very lost. They go through this cycle of being extremely frustrated and getting angry at the beginning of the semester, because it's totally alien to the way that they've been taught before. And then they get through this level of extreme frustration. They hit the wall. And then they say, okay, I guess I better attack this problem, because she's not going to do it for me, you know. And then they start working it through, and then that's what's so empowering about it, is they say, oh my God, I can do this, I can figure this out, I can solve this problem. And then of course, then they come to me and they ask me little questions, and then I'll give we'll have little discussions where we'll fine tune things and make sure that their code isn't, you know, spaghetti code that's 15 miles long versus, you know, oh, we could do this in a few lines, and think about programming skills.
You mentioned there were no slackers, that everybody was involved. A lot of
no, there are slackers.
Okay.
There are slackers.
Yeah, there's many.
No, you must engage to be successful. Everyone in my class is not successful.
Okay.
Yeah.
In small groups, a lot of times one person will do the boatload of the heavy lifting.
Yes, yes. And one thing I haven't been able to get away from, and theoretically it would be ideal, because in the business world we don't give exams that work usually, unless you're getting a raise for some sort of certification or something like that, I guess. But we don't usually give exams that work. I can't get away from exams. And so I give individual exams, and so they have to pass those individual exams in order to pass my class. And so this is a way, the SDL is an avenue that they can follow in order to learn the material they need to learn, and it's much more engaging. But I haven't found a way to get away from giving exams, because of the people that slack back there and say, you know, oh yeah, I can just follow along because my group is doing well.
Do you have different scenarios from year to year, because students pass on information?
I tweak mine every semester. I've tweaked mine a little bit, and so they aren't the same.
But you know, I find my students really get into it. They're not giving that stuff away. They really enjoy it. But this being said, Judy and I accidentally jumped in it with both feet, and when they said you have to create a scenario, we heard scenario class. Well, really what they said was just a task. So had I known that, I wouldn't have done quite what I did the first year. But what I did was I turned my whole class into one scenario. I'm the teacher only one day, and then I become the project manager, and we have staff meetings, and I evaluate them on their projects and teamwork and etc. But you don't have to do that. You could simply take one task that you're now teaching, and I don't care whether you're teaching humanities, high-tech areas, there is something that really would fit nicely in the business world that you could change. And so Judy and I thought we'd kind of engage you and stimulate you and make you think, what one thing, it doesn't even have to be it can be a 20-minute lecture or something that you have them do, that you turn into a scenario with maybe industry input.
Yeah, that's a good point. An awful lot of people do scenarios that are a couple weeks long. We helped some people back east develop some this summer that they only ran for 3 weeks. Elaine does her final project in her CS classes, and that's 5 weeks? Yeah, 5 weeks at the end of the semester. So the first half of her course is traditional lecture lab. So she goes through all the material, and then she has turned her final project into an SDL-based assignment. Yeah, Kat and I were a little insane, and we looked at
We didn't know any better.
Said, this is such a cool idea, and I said, hey, if I'm going to try this, I'm going to try it. So we stepped in from day one. The students walk in the classroom, and they're in that SDL environment. And so it's like, if we're going to do it, let's do it, see how it works. And it's been fascinating. It was one of the most terrifying things I'd ever done. And the first semester was excruciatingly painful and a roller coaster to emotionally for us as teachers.
Did you go through curricular changes with the committee in order to do that, or did you just do it?
No, we just did it.
Well, we did get the, I got the buy-in from my dean.
Yeah, we have a really supportive administration at our school, and our dean is a huge supporter of trying new things, and so he's very gung-ho. And that's one thing we're going to start this, but that's one thing you want to make sure you have, because students complain, other administrators look at you, or other faculty look at you and wonder what you're doing, and your evaluations drop, or at least both of our evaluations drop.
I'm sure whether they dropped, they're just different.
Mine dropped.
Yeah.
I know they're dropped.
The first semester yours dropped.
And they come back.
The first semester, because it's such an alien way of teaching, that a lot of the students get angry. It's funny because they'll say, this was a really valuable experience, and I learned a lot, but I wanted you to teach me.
Yeah.
And so, what's interesting is that we have to make it an entire culture. So that the first class they're in, they see that and they experience that. And then when they get in the second class, oh yeah, I see this, here we go again. And then by their third class, it's a culture.
And interestingly enough, is the class that I took, the enrollments were low anyway, so I had to get the buy-in from my dean because I didn't want to cancel 4 or 5 students. And that's what I wanted to target, was a low enrollment. And interestingly enough, this semester I have, I've got 12 in this class. It's typically 4 by word of mouth. And I hope they're not saying, oh, this is really easy, there's no test, because I don't test. I think what they're saying is, that was fun. And why can't learning be fun?
The quizzes that you give, or the exams that you give, are those testing the knowledge that they should have gained by reading the reference material you're telling them to go to? My exams are written paper and pencil code, write programs. So here's a problem, write the code for it. So they have to have embedded in their head the syntax of the language. They have to know all the control structures that have been talked about this semester, and they have to be able to logically solve the problem, and then they have to write the code for it. So essentially, it's the same type of exam I would have given at the end of a typical semester when I was doing lecture lab. Like, before I can let you go on to the next semester in my CS class, I have to make sure that you know the basics. We use C++, of C++. And if you do, then I know that you can be successful starting the second semester. And so those are the exams that I did.
But
So
it's
it's all
based on her
content
tasks too. So in one task, they may learn the if loop and all that stuff, right? That's what he's asking.
Sure. Oh, no, my tasks, yeah, they're kind of general. It's interesting now that the tasks don't follow a book.
So I don't say, oh, task 2 is going to cover if, and that's all. And so now task 2 is going to cover a whole variety of information. They might have to learn about file I/O, they might need some if-else's, they might need repetition. And so they're all over the place with what they have to pick up in order to do a task. And so it takes quite a bit of work on their part in order to get this information together and again ask questions. Yeah.
How much, I mean, since there's two things going on, there's scenario and a narrative, and then the mastery kind of, here's what those things you need to do, or figure out how to do it. And have you thought about, can you pull those apart? What are the strengths that come from having an interesting narrative? What are the strengths that come from that? Because mastery's been around for a long time, but it's interesting. I mean, this would be, the scenario is really motivating me. So,
yeah, well,
but there's, in the back of their mind, they're like, well, this is all fake.
Yeah, well, it is all fake. It is all fake. And that's where coming in, having industry come in, and actually some people will have industry people come into the classroom and introduce the scenario and say, hey, I need you to do this. We need to have this piece of software written for our company, and we want you to write the software for us, and then they'll interact with them. Elaine's done some of that.
Well, the other thing, the scenario gives a sort of a professional level to the discourse, and so we tell them, you have to document your code, right? And then they don't really believe us if we're just a teacher. But if we say, look, these are the QuickSoft style guidelines, and we have, we say, here they are, and have the QuickSoft logo on it, and then the person from industry comes in and backs that up and says, yes, we fire somebody if they submit code that doesn't have documentation. And so that, it makes them feel like they need to come up to a certain standard, and they learn about what those standards are and how to behave professionally as well. And so behavior towards each other in the team, the level of English in their emails or posts to their public discussions.
Just make it real. It's not fake.
Yeah, no, you make it real in the classroom. In fact, in the classroom, you're not a teacher anymore. I'm your supervisor.
It's funny, they do get into it. When I get emails, it says instead of Dear Professor House, it says Boss or Dear Project Manager. I mean, they really get into it.
Yeah, they do.
Maybe it's just because they're kids.
Well, there are a lot of our students are kids. A lot of our students.
Even my grown-ups are kids.
Yeah, returning.
They want to believe.
Yeah.
They want to be programmers.
Yeah. The people, it's interesting that the students that I've had that have been in industry that come back and take this class, they say it is the most valuable thing that they've ever done. And so I think back to a course in software engineering that I took when I was in graduate school decades ago. and I remember when I was taking that, I thought, oh, what a waste of time. This is just also common sense, and this is just crazy, and I'm wasting my energy in this one class this semester. And then I got a job in aerospace right out of graduate school, and I walked into this software development house that was doing government contract work, and I knew exactly what they were doing because of the software engineering course that I had taken. I mean, the development life cycle that we studied at school was exactly what was being employed by this company I walked into. And I was like, oh, wow, that was such a great class. So I'm waiting for these reviews from these students, maybe not necessarily with the first semester that they have, coming back and saying, oh, this was valuable. But down the road, they're going to come back and say, wow, that was an invaluable experience. So I think we're teaching them how to think and how to solve problems because we're forcing them to do that with our facilitation versus our just feeding it to them. Anyway, let's go through this. Do you want to start?
No, go ahead, Kat.
Okay. So what we want you to do is we want you to think for a minute about how you could take something from one of your classes and maybe turn it into a scenario-based learning. And again, you can take a small portion of your class. Is there a project that you do in your class now? And that's pretty easy, I think, to convert over into a scenario-based style. So pick one class that you might want to use scenario-based learning in. And then choose some content from that class that you think you can incorporate into a task, whether that task be a week long, 3 weeks long, or you want to, you don't know, you want to go
You do it a day.
Yeah, well, I don't know if you could do a scenario in a day. You could do problem in a day, but scenario. What do you think? I think a week. Probably at least a week.
Yeah.
What's the difference between scenario and problem?
You know, I don't know. Problem-based learning, what's the definition of problem-based learning versus scenario-based learning?
Problem-based learning is more of an umbrella. Oh, go ahead, Elaine. You were
Well, I was going to say the scenario is the fiction, the job
story.
description, the company name, yeah. And the problem is like, this is the project for today.
Yeah.
So that's different from what the researchers would call those different terms.
I know, because in fact, what was her name? Kimi. I put that backwards. She asked me what the difference was too, and I told her, don't quote me on this, but problem-based, we certainly are under problem-based, but there's certain elements that we have. We do have a scenario. We do a certain amount of role-playing. And another thing that's really quite mandatory is the teamwork and the community buy-in. And I think that's really what makes us different. But we are under the umbrella of problem-based. So, did I say that one? Because I told her not to quote me.
And we use the terminology scenario and task. And usually the way that I think of it in my head is the scenario is the overarching story that embraces the entire project or projects that you might be doing in your class, the company story and that sort of thing. And a task is one piece that you're going, one project that you're going for.
In our scenario, we started with 4, Judy and I both teach the same students, and we had 2 other faculty that started this journey with us. And it was Cisco and networking, Microsoft, and Judy's programming, and myself, which is Unix and Linux. And so we kept the same company, and it was our hope, and what we're finding now, it's true, is as they go between courses, they say, oh, I'm going to work for AES again.
Yeah.
So we keep the same company, the same logo, and the same style. So we're hoping that students know that, and they just walk in an English class and say, oh, where's AES?
So think about something in one of your classes that you could turn into a project. You don't want it to be one concept. You don't want it to be one, like in programming, I don't want it to say, oh, I want to do a task that revolves around if-else structures. Don't be that small. Think, I want to do a project. I want them to do something that would be worthwhile in the business that my students are going to be going into. And so, like I said, I have a program, I have one task where they have to, they're given the specs for a bunch of functions that are going to be turned into a program. They have to break them up. They have to figure out who's going to do what, how they're going to do the scheduling, and everybody does their portion. And then they're going to come back and integrate that together. And so I figure out what is it that I want them to do, and what is it, so they're going to learn the soft skills. They have to communicate. They have to learn the importance of following specs exactly so that the integration is going to go relatively seamlessly later. Instead of saying, I'm going to blow off this function name, I want to give it a different name. I don't want to use these parameters, I'm going to use different parameters. They realize the importance of that because that's so critical when you're working on a large project in industry. And they have to become familiar with all of those features that they're going to use in the business setting. And then I say, okay, and what are the structures that they're going to have to do in order to do this? So when I design the specs, I think, we'll throw in some file I/O, we'll throw in some repetition here, we'll throw in, max-min calculations. They should always be able to do that, or this or that, and I'll put that stuff into the specs for the program. But I didn't go through the book and follow the book and say, okay, we're going to do a Nelson, and we're going to do one Loops and introduce them sequentially. So think about a project you could do that incorporates a series of things that you do that could make something meaningful and of some content that they might be developing for a business that they might be in down the road. So, and then think about how you teach it now. How do you teach that information now? Do we want to fill all these out and then come back and talk about them?
Well, no, we could just talk about it. We don't need to fill it out because if somebody can give us
Does
an
anybody
idea.
have an idea of something that comes to mind that you think, oh, maybe I could do this? Maybe that's the
How about the teachers you're working with in your Nico that we were talking about, you know? She's not teaching it, but she's helping people.
Right. So over at Rainy Community College, within the Environmental Control and Technology Department, basically the instructors are trying to get the students to be more hands-on and to be able to think critically in various situations, specifically within the heating, air conditioning, ventilation, and air conditioning department. And so what we're trying to do is figure out problems where, you know, there's some sort of situation that they're in. They work in teams in order to figure out solutions. And so,
Yeah, what was the one we talked about? Like, for instance, the heat went up. Well, you know, but it's not really that.
right. So basically what we're trying to figure out is, are there situations that are happening in the industry right now that we can see? And so one of the situations were, was that, you know, a student had to go to a house, and the person complained that, you know, they felt that it was cold in the house, but they thought that maybe it was the heating system that was off, but they weren't sure. And so this is the problem that the students are faced with, and so, you know, are asking the teacher, you know, they have to interview the potential customer and ask them, well, you know, is it the heat? When does the heat seem to change? Or, you know, does it seem like there are other things that could be problems? And so basically the students have to kind of, not really troubleshoot, but go through kind of reasoning where they're figuring out, okay, well, this would be the answer, so what could it be next? You know, and they're thinking about that, and then being able to talk to their client and figure out, okay, well, this is the symptom, and to talk about that symptom a little bit more. And so basically, for the problem-based scenarios, is that oftentimes it's not the problem that you think it is. It's actually something else. And I think that's one of the ideal situations for the students, because a lot of times when you're on the job, it's not always obvious. And so you have to think in that moment, okay, am I asking the right question? If I don't know the answers, how am I going to go find that resource, whether it's on the internet or, you know, go ask another colleague. And so at Lane, we're trying to have to place these scenarios in, you know, the actual class trying to do this. And, you know, it is challenging. I think a lot of teachers that we're working with, there are specific time frames, and there are things that we can't fit it in. You know, there's just too much content, there's too much that we have to go through and explain and test. There's no room to fit this in. And so what we're trying to do is figure out how can we integrate this idea, this problem-based scenarios into the curriculum, but have it be more of an integrated process, so it's not that it's only the scenario. Right? How can you learn these technical skills and integrate the scenario and do the testing and have them think about these critical thinking skills?
Exactly.
Those are exactly the questions I had. But I'm too busy. I don't have extra time in my day or life to do anything with employability skills and these problems. And it works. You have to change your perspective dramatically.
You know, a couple of things I found in time is, one, the students are so motivated, especially in their teams, that they put a lot more time into themselves than they would if they were just doing a little homework assignment. And then the other thing is that if you miss a couple of small topics in the course outline, what you taught them is how to learn. And so in the next, if they go to the next class and say, oh, I didn't learn about file I/O or something, then they can go to the book and read the chapter and pick it up. Or ask the instructor a question or, you know, somehow pick it up themselves.
And I think another question for us in teams, how do you build accountability? And so at Lady right now, we're trying to have students evaluate each other on the team. So if one person is not performing and you know that your team member is going to be evaluating you, you feel like, okay, well, I have to kind of step up because that person's going to notice if I'm not, didn't trigger that.
Is that working? Is that working?
It is. I think that students feel, peer pressure, a little bit of peer pressure to do it, and sometimes you use that in certain situations, but that could be really stressful.
There's not a culture of thinking and marking on each other?
A little bit, but I guess it's, one of those situations where, we want to do well, and so I think it's not as negative.
But I think in the real world, I've been in jobs where my partner or team isn't working, and I wasn't going to narc on them. That's the culture. So maybe that in itself is a learning process. But I haven't had any problems with that except this semester. I had one that clearly did all the work, and the other one just struggled. He gave us a lot of, but he had other things going on in his life. But that other student would not criticize him at all. And it was really hard for me to, I needed that too, because part of the grade is group work, but, that's part of life too. So.
Yeah, I've had students that have been sheltered by the rest of the group. Everything's wonderful, everything's fabulous. We do something in SBL that we haven't talked about, which is called debriefing. After every task, we have them reflect on the process and discuss that. And that's usually, if we don't do it in class, I have them turn that in individually and privately so that they can give me information about their group. And the group is constantly telling me, oh yeah, this person's good, oh yeah, it's good. And I could just look at him and notice that things went.
Yeah, I do know.
He would tell me constantly, like, it's fabulous, this is so trivial, I'm just, doing great. And that's, again, where my exams, it's like, you don't pass the exams, you're not going to pass the class. And I can't get away from that because somebody can't hide. They're going to fall on their face the next semester or the third semester. Yeah.
So we've only got a few minutes left. Does anybody have any other ideas of something you teach that you could incorporate into scenario? And obviously, if you do that, you can think about, okay, now I'm going to have problems. Group work, there's some things you're going to have to work out with that.
I'm not IGC educator. I'm also a instructional designer and working with faculty to move their classes online. We also look at it as like you're saying, one piece at a time, because any shift can be change for us. We don't know that's change. So that's, I think what you're saying, that one piece at a time and seeing how eventually it does save you time somewhere else or some way else.
Exactly. To incorporate those things we're talking about. Exactly.
I wanted to ask you where those time-saving pieces were encouragement that they will save time.
Well, I think just the fact that you're not lecturing, you're not taking, I meet with my students 4 hours a week, and I'm not spending 4 hours a week talking to them as a talking head. I'm spending 20 minutes a week talking to them, or half an hour a week talking to them directly like this. And the rest of the time, they're interacting and they're actually working. And they're learning and they're moving forward. And I'm there to help them do it. And so it takes a lot of work up front to get the project created and to know what it is you want to do so that your semester is moving forward and you're covering the materials and satisfying the objectives of your course. But it works.
I actually ran out of town. I completed all my objectives way ahead of time because they were eating it up. And I really believe they were learning. I thought it proved to me they were learning, and I still had 3 weeks left to go. So I take 3 weeks somewhere along the line. I had to think of stuff really quick.
Yeah, our students are vastly more capable than we
give them credit
for. And I found that when I was getting all these students that had never programmed before, they didn't even know what a compiler was. I tell a lot of my students coming in at the community college, what's a compiler? I take ECS, so I want the compiler. And I tell them, walk in the first day, and I say, okay, here are 2 programs you need to compile, and one of them has an input file, you need to figure out where to put it. And I thought, there's no way they can do this without mine. Showing them like I do every semester. Okay, and within 2 days, the entire class has it. And so they're much more capable than we give them credit for. We just have to give them that incentive to show their capability and to try on their own instead of us saying, oh, what we impart just a value. Anyway, I think we're about out of time. Is there any questions? We have a website down here at the bottom for learnpbl.com. If you go to that site, you can actually see several scenarios that are up there and available for you guys to use, to modify, to do whatever you wish with. There are quite a few up there. We have workshops that we do on a regular basis for teaching this technique and also then training other people at your institutions or areas if you would like to get involved in that. You can find that information.
We have some software that you'll be able to develop your course, pass those, also assess your course, so it's worth a look.
There's a lot available, so I hope if you're at all interested, you'll look around and take the lead to join us in the trenches.